Okay, people are gonna start joining now.
Okay.
One second, let me first introduce you. So there is a session running now, so people are gonna be jumping from that session from this one.
Cool.
Yeah.
No worries.
So like for those who are here already, I would like to introduce to you our guests. One second. This is okay. So I would like so this session is be conducted by Susan Park and Sahana Kumar. Susan is a senior product designer at Gladly, the customer support platform, helping leading companies provide more personalized customer services. And Sahana is a product designer currently at Google. She's deeply enjoyed learning about habits of users in other markets and designing experience that solve everyday problems in thoughtful ways. So they are here today to share the experience with us. Without further ado, I will let them take show. So Susan
Yeah,
and Sahana, go.
awesome. And
Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you so much. And just to confirm, you can see this sharing screen, right?
Yes, I can. So I
Yes.
think it's good.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Okay, so hello, welcome to our talk. Today we're going to be talking about design debt. My name is Susan, and I have here with me Sahana. We are close friends, former classmates, and most importantly, fellow designers.
Yes, like Susan mentioned, we are former classmates. We met 10 years ago, which is wild, at Carnegie Mellon University, where we got our bachelor's in the design school there. Since then, I've had a pretty wide range of experiences, starting at an agency, Frog Design. I've worked at Google on the Next Billion Users team and currently on the Ads Transparency team. And I worked at Spotify designing premium experiences for global markets.
Awesome. And on the flip side, I've been mostly in the startup land. After college, I helped co-found a drone startup, which was backed by Lightspeed Ventures, a really big venture capital firm in the States. And I also helped start Gladly, which I joined almost 6 years ago, helped build a design team and help build our company. So together, Sahana and I have a really wide range of experience. Sahana doing things from agency and then working at really big companies like Google and Spotify. And then me on the flip side of that, starting my own company and then helping build design teams from the ground up.
So before we start, we wanted to just cover a couple things. Like Susan just mentioned, we've covered a pretty wide range of experiences between the two of us. But as we were sharing our experiences, we found that we had really similar stories of dealing with design debt, even though our companies might be quite different. So due to that, we know that this is a valuable situation to talk about, no matter where you work, what type of designer you are, what level you are in your career. This is probably a situation that you will either have already dealt with or will deal with. So it's valuable to be explicit and chat openly about it so we can have tools to work through it. And the second thing is these tools that we're going to mention are things that everyone can do. But so they may seem quite obvious, but we still think that they're often overlooked in the context of addressing design debt in product development. So to get everybody on the same page, we want to tell you a little story, hypothetical, of a team dealing with design debt. Okay, so just imagine there's a team. There's a PM named Rob, an engineer named Alex, and a designer named Irene, and they all work together. They work at a shoe e-commerce company, and their company is really successful. It sells shoes to people all around the world, and they all really love working there. So something exciting happens. The e-commerce company partners with a new brand, a really popular hiking shoe brand, Imagine. And so they have a new business goal of surfacing this product to as many users as possible to hopefully get them to purchase the shoe. So Rob comes to Irene, the designer, with a new PRD. He's really excited and he says, I've got an idea. I want you to mock up a design of surfacing this partner hiking shoe on every page of the website, including whatever you search in the website. We need to show up this hiking shoe. We've got about 1 week to get the mocks ready so we can start building. So can you just go ahead and execute on that and get back to me? So that's his product requirement doc. Irene's actually really excited. She loves hiking, she loves this brand, and she thinks this is an opportunity for her to combine her passions with her job. So she not only wants to explore Rob's idea, but she wants to kind of get creative and explore some of her own ideas. She does a little bit of research on how to get people more likely to embrace healthy living, hiking, whatnot, and comes up with a few ideas. The first one is a personalized shoe quiz, the idea around helping people know that maybe finding the right shoe from that partner brand for their lifestyle might make them more willing to buy. The second one is a shoe customizer. They can personalize every aspect of the shoe from shoelaces to how high the heel is, again, maybe more likely to buy. And then finally, she also mocks up Rob's idea of having the partner shoe on every page of the website. She is really excited to share these with her team. She takes them and shares them with Rob and Alex. And although they appreciate her initiative, they pretty quickly shut down the other two ideas without much discussion and decide to go for the easiest option, which is surfacing the partner shoe on every page of the site. They make this decision based on the available eng effort and reusing existing components. Irene doesn't really have much of a say. Irene is pretty bummed out by this outcome, and she knows that this proposed solution could result in potential UX issues because people might be a little confused they might be searching for heels and they're seeing a hiking boot. And not only this, but she predicts that this could actually not achieve their business goal because people could be quite jarred by the search experience because it doesn't work how they expected. She asks her team if they can hold off a little bit, maybe do a usability test with actual users, scope in some user-focused success metrics, or at least plan to revisit the solution after launch. But unfortunately, all those three options are shut down pretty quickly because they really need to get rolling in the build. There's not time or resources, so she has to go in blind with this solution. Fast forward 6 months later, and it's a disaster. All the revenue has tanked. They haven't met their business goal. And not only that, but support tickets have skyrocketed because people are really confused by this new search experience. So the team is asked to scrap the whole thing and start again. And as you can predict, that's already double the work. So this whole experience did not go as it could have been.
Awesome. So now we kind of want to, looking at that story, we want to talk about design debt. Some of you may have heard the term technical debt, and this is more on the engineering side. If you kind of go with a less than ideal solution, how you can create technical debt. The same thing actually exists on the design side. It's when a negative effect of a product decision is made and when business and engineering factors outweigh the design considerations. At best, it's a minor inconvenience to the user with a feature that doesn't quite work how it's expected. And then at worst, it's months of effort that's wasted on a feature and it's unusable by our core user base. So in the story, we saw that it was really clearly kind of, tanking, tanking the metrics as well as skyrocketing support tickets. So that is where a lot of technical or design debt comes in. And you can also think about this as kind of like credit card debt. You kind of swipe the card and you kind of accrue debt as you go on. So that's how you can kind of think about it. Today, we want to go over two things. One, how to identify the risk of design debt, and two, how to mitigate it and influence product decisions. So firstly, we want to kind of go over how can you identify the risk of design debt? So when you see kind of red flags throughout the design process, this is kind of where you can kind of see early on and identify it. So first, make sure that there are user needs. In the story, we saw that there were really no user needs considered. Secondly, make sure that there are product goals, not only business goals, to be considered. And then thirdly, make sure that there are design metrics or design research that can go in. So let's dive in to the first one, which is user needs. This is a really important kind of red flag to look out for if the project requirements doc doesn't have any user needs considered. In the example, Rob came in with a really great business goal of saying, hey, we want to increase revenue for this partnership with the shoe brand. But he didn't frame his requirements in terms of the user. It was all business and kind of money based. He didn't think about what would be best for the user or how the user might buy the shoe. Secondly, there was a really strict time constraint. So Irene had 1 week to design this. And so that didn't give her time to weigh in on, okay, but what are the user needs? What are the user goals? And then secondly, she didn't have time to research. So she could have spent the first week kind of going out and doing more qualitative research with users to understand what they might want. Secondly, it's really important that there are product goals, kind of similar to the previous point. But if there are no product goals, this will kind of create misalignment and disagreements on in the future when you're kind of deciding on direction. So in this example, we saw that Irene had 3 really great ideas, and Rob and Alex were not willing to sacrifice kind of engineering hours to go with any of the other solutions. So this is, bound to create design debt later on. So making sure that you're aligned on the product goals helps you make a good decision on a direction. And then secondly, we saw that there was no scoping done on the other solutions. The other ideas were not scoped out even briefly by Alex and Rob, and they were kind of assumed not to be viable. And then lastly, there was no design metrics or research or iteration that was baked into the process or into the roadmap. So we saw that, they kind of shipped the product, and there was no qualitative research or follow-up that Irene could have done to kind of talk to the users and understand if it is painful experience or if it was going as planned. And then secondly, there was no success metrics on product validation, so making sure that the design and tasks are working correctly. And then lastly, there was no iteration or plans to work on it in the roadmap. They kind of knew that it was not the ideal solution, but they kind of left it there and started working on other things. So that is really bound to, again, create design debt later on. So now I'll hand it off to Sahana to talk a little bit about mitigating this.
Thank you. So yeah, Susan just went through a lot of red flags that you can see in the beginning of a project to maybe predict future design debt. But now what I'm going to talk through is a few tips and tricks along the product lifecycle for how you can potentially chat with your team to mitigate future design debt. So as Susan and I were preparing for this talk, we noticed that a lot of our tips and tricks kind of fit cleanly along the product lifecycle. And this is really useful because sometimes design debt conversations can happen, when you're about to launch or when the project has just started. So it's good to have tools along every step of that cycle. So the first phase is the product framing phase, when you're really thinking about what the actual problem is, and the key tool here is curiosity, asking questions and aligning on the problem. You can keep.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Cool. So basically, like I mentioned, the main tool here is questions. So, when your team might come to you with a solution that they've already determined, it's important to get everybody to take a few steps back and align on what is the problem that we're solving. Sometimes, when you jump too quickly to the solution, it can accidentally deviate from the problem that is initially brought to the table. And so it's good to get people back on that. And then ask, why are we solving this problem? Can we frame it as a how might we? So a good example in the story is as simple as if Irene had said, how might we help people engage in a healthy lifestyle through this partner brand? It's still achieving the business goal, but it's opening up for a lot more creative problem solving where the team could potentially think of a lot more ideas rather than being really simply focusing on that, that search experience. The third question is, do we know what the user pain points are, or are we making assumptions? I've personally seen a lot of product requirement docs that don't even mention what the actual user pain points are, or makes, or like I said, makes really bold assumptions around it. It's really good to have research or just be really explicit that we don't quite know what the pain points are, and so how can we narrow in on that? And then the final good question is design success metrics. This is a topic that's kind of newer on my team, but I found it to be really useful. Not only, this is not only around usability and ease of completing the task that the feature is trying to achieve, but I also find it to be useful for design quality. So this is good to bring up with your engineering and product team around if your team has a visual design system, or are we meeting the basic, interaction design heuristics that are necessary to have a usable feature. So holding everyone accountable as they're thinking of their overall success metrics, adding in these as well, so that these can be revisited later down the line. So a lot of the times the answers to these questions aren't clear. So we've got a few more things to try to do in the beginning of the product development phase. The first one, as much as possible, this is so simple, but just try to be included when things are getting scoped. A lot of the time, especially when I was a more junior designer, I would get a very clearly defined brief, sometimes even with mocks made by my PM or something. It's great that they're getting creative, but see if you can say, next time, can you include me as soon as this project gets on your desk? I want to ask questions. I want to understand the problem. I just want to be included. And then the next thing is you need to use your voice. When you are included in that product requirement doc, you need to comment and ask questions, tag in research, just make sure that you're engaging as much as possible. And the final tip is, we saw that Rob asked Irene to mock something up really quickly with a week turnaround. As much as possible, try not to visualize immediately what's asked of you, unless, of course, there's a really, really tight timeline. But if you can get people to sort of engage in a conversation, ask these questions, if you end up mocking it up too quickly, I found that people can really latch onto that solution and be less willing to explore other solutions. The next phase of the product lifecycle is my favorite phase. Once you've understood the problem space a little more, is when you can go super wide with your concepts, think of all the different ways to solve this problem, and most of all, tell a story about your users when you're trying to pitch to the rest of your team. So a few questions that I think are important to ask not only your team, but also yourself. First of all, what is the context that this feature lives in? It's really easy for people to get really hyper-focused on a specific surface that they're designing on, but just zooming out and thinking, what is the day-to-day even of my user when they use this feature? So a good example is Rob was so focused on the search experience, or not even the search experience, but just the search results page and having that ad there. But if Irene had said, okay, what are the mindsets of a user who's searching? What's most likely to get them to convert? They could have come up with a much more rich solution that would have considered maybe some of the things that made the solution fail later down the line. The second one is using data to make your points, or even quantifying the ROI of your solution. This one is tough if you don't have the resources, but if you're lucky enough to have a data scientist or an engineer who can help you with this, leverage them not only to help validate your solution, but most of all to help you make your own design decisions. I find that to be a really useful tool. And then finally, we saw that Irene wasn't able to leverage or to scope in any research. That's totally fine. It happens all the time. But there are other things you can do, such as if you've got existing research on your team that's at least tangential, if you can reference it, or leveraging market research. There's a lot of just consumer research out there on people's purchase habits, search habits that Irene could have used to strengthen her argument.
And third is the refining phase. So let's say you've done the ideation phase and you have a couple of ideas. Make sure to lean on your engineers. If you can, try to get your engineers involved even from the ideation phase, where you kind of bring them in and doing the brainstorm together. That way, in the refining phase, when you're kind of deciding on the pros and cons of solutions and trying to decide on a direction, they will be really in the mindset of the user. So they're not just going to try to push for the easiest and simplest technical solution. They're going to try to kind of pick the best solution for the user. Secondly, ask them to scope out some of your other solutions as well. You know, one of the things that we found in our experience is that sometimes you can have a couple different directions, and me and a PM will think, oh, this is going to take way too long. And we give it to an engineer and they say, actually, it's only going to take 1 or 2 more weeks. So in those situations, you really want to push for that better solution, even if it's going to push the date out a week or two, because that's really going to mitigate the design debt that can be accrued later on. And yeah, you might be really surprised. And then the last phase is the product development phase, when you're kind of building the product and then kind of shipping the product. Here, it's really important that you start discussions with your PM early on about things like post-launch research. So you want to have qualitative research kind of on deck, either when you ship the feature, or maybe a few weeks down the line, to see how people are using the feature, how they feel about the feature. Secondly, A/B testing, probably not so much at startups and smaller companies, but Sahana's had great experience at bigger companies where there is A/B testing. So you really want to push for that on your team if that is an option, so that you can kind of leverage and, metrics to see which solution is better. And then lastly, putting it on the roadmap. So this is a really important one, because a lot of times we found that, you build something and say, oh, we'll come back to it, but you actually never come back to it. So that product just lives on being, really janky experience for customers. So if you can, talk to your PM about, hey, in a month down the line, let's have a conversation about how we did on this feature, or to review metrics and such. Or if you can say, hey, let's look at the roadmap, and we have kind of a 2-week sprint here that we're thinking about another project. Try to say, hey, let's go back to this initial project that we kind of left off, and put it on the roadmap.
Awesome. So those are our tools and tricks to address design debt at all phases of the product lifecycle. But overall, I think it's just really important to be objective and remember that even with all of these conversations that you have, if the reasons to do the solution that the rest of the team is pushing for outweigh the reasons to do yours, you need to move on and be a team player. So just some good questions to ask yourself. First of all, is my solution actually meeting the business goal? At the end of the day, even though you are the champion for the user, you're working for a company that needs to achieve its business goals, and that's important to also weigh equally importantly. Second of all, this happens to me all the time. Are you stuck really on a specific edge case? And if so, can you leverage the rest of your team to help you zoom out and understand its significance in the context of the whole feature? And then finally, like I kind of mentioned, am I actually being a good team player? Am I leveraging the expertise of the rest of my team, or am I really being stubborn and stuck on my solution?
So we want you to kind of remember what we talked about today, and using the tools and frameworks that we laid out. And you can use this throughout the life cycle of your project, on any project. So first, really being able to pinpoint and identify the risk of design debt, making sure to look for user needs. Are there user needs in the product requirements doc? Are we thinking about product goals, not just the business goals? Like, what is important for the user? And then third, thinking about, are there design metrics in place? Is there research in place? And then secondly, thinking about, all of these things during a product lifecycle phase, starting from the product framing phase, making sure to ask the right questions to make sure that everyone is on the same page with what you're trying to build. Secondly, on the ideation phase, making sure you're telling a story about your users, making sure the other people on the team understand what it feels like for the users. And then third, on the refining phase, leaning on engineers to help quantify kind of the directions, getting them involved early. The last phase, product development phase, making sure there are metrics in place or research that you can kind of enable to validate the success.
Overall, though, like we kind of alluded to earlier, you need to remember that everyone on your team has the best intentions and you're all working towards the same goal. You're a unified unit. But you are the voice of the user in the room, and it's your responsibility to speak loudly about that. And remember that your POV is extremely valuable, and don't be afraid to speak up.
Yay, awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Again, though, this is just scraping the surface of what's possible to mitigate design debt. So we'd love to hear from you. These are our Twitter handles. Please reach out if you have any other ideas. We're really interested in continuing this discussion. Thank you.
Oh, nice. This is a very insightful and a very different perspective. Design that. We do have questions here. Someone is asking, how do you influence an idea that is yours?
Yeah, I see that. And I also see the next one of the best way to not get stuck on a particular idea. I think, in my opinion, Susan, weigh in, but in my opinion, this is when you need to leverage your team. And like, especially the second question, like if you're stuck on a specific thing, ask your team, honestly, am I being realistic here, or are there other constraints that I need to weigh in? And if so, then you need to kind of have that discussion together and weigh all the options.
And then the question on how to influence an idea that is yours, I think making sure to go back and thinking about, why is your idea, the best viable option? Really framing it in how the user will go through that solution, and then bringing it back to the product goals and the business goals. Like this, if your idea is really you think is the best one because it should check all the boxes, it 100% checks off the box for product goals, business goals, but also the user will have the most delightful and best experience. And kind of going back to the tools we talked about in talking about, can you quantify it with money, with metrics? We're spending $1 for each of this ad, and if most people are going to drop off like 30%, then and let's say you're spending like $10 million on it, then you're just going to lose $3 million, right? So kind of framing it, talking about it in like those kinds of metric ways too, will help you get on the same page with the PM who is more business oriented.
Okay, I have a question. The like technology that you can measure, there is specific metrics. Like, how do you measure design that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's something that I'm honestly still sort of figuring out in my day-to-day practice. One thing that I was beginning to pilot at one of my previous teams was like creating kind of a design scorecard and creating really measurable metrics around like having kind of if you can, having like a number involved with percentage of users who in research enjoyed using this product, or how much on a scale of 1 to 5 are we adhering to the design standards, things like that. And I think it can't always be so measurable like with numbers, but at least if you're getting it on the table and having the conversation, then you can hold the rest of your team accountable to these things, because oftentimes they're, like Susan's mentioned, this design debt is the first debt to be sacrificed. Like, oh, it's okay if we cut this corner because we need to really capitalize on end resources. So if we say, no, it's not okay if we cut this corner, we've held ourselves to this standard for design, then hopefully people can listen more.
Yeah. And then just speaking a little bit more on the metrics themselves, it is important for you when those metrics discussions are happening to say like, hey, if this is working correctly, we should have we should see this type of adoption. So setting goals for that, and then having metrics set in place and saying like, oh, we had 70% drop off after this screen. Like that kind of stuff is really helpful for you to be like, hey, this clearly isn't working, right? So making sure every step of the way there's tracking in place for things like adoption and retention. Those are really good indicators of if it's working. And then secondly, really important, my favorite thing is qualitative research. Those are still metrics, right? It's qualitative metrics, but those are really valuable, and usually the tools that you will use to understand if there are really major pain points.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Sahana. And thank you, Susan, for your time. We really appreciate your presence here. So people, if you have more questions for Sahana and Susan, you can send to them on Twitter, as they said, or even try the platform that we're using. I believe you both are there, right?
Yes.
Uh, so yes, we're gonna jump to the adaptly session now, the mentor one-on-one. So who sign up? Who sign up for the session? Probably will receive an email from my team. And after adaptlees, we have Bapu's presentation. So see you guys in a bit. And
Thank you
ladies,
so
once
much.
again, thank you for your presence.
All right. Thank you
Bye.
so much.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.
Bye.
Bye.